Welcome to the Copper Spice YouTube channel, and thanks for joining us. In this video, we are going to explore the ideas of sequencing and how it relates to better code and undefined behavior. Sequencing. Understanding the definitions of sequencing and side effects is interesting, but not an area many developers study. The real value of this subject comes about when we tie these topics together in an effort to avoid undefined behavior, increase readability, and strive for correctness. The way sequencing works should be important to C++ programmers, since we write our statements and expressions in a particular order for a reason. The correct behavior of a program requires the expressions are evaluated in an order which matches our intentions and meets the design. What is interesting is that the compiler is free to reorder expressions and sometimes alter the order of code in a given statement as long as the meaning of your program is unchanged. The arbitrary reordering of expressions by the compiler can only occur at specific places which are well defined by the standard. The rules of sequencing are what constrains this process. As a developer, understanding sequencing may help to avoid potential bugs in your code. As an example, when you are debugging a function which accesses non-local data, it may actually be necessary to look at expressions which were evaluated prior to the current function in order to figure out what really happened. One of the reasons to study sequencing is to make it easier to recognize source code which results in undefined behavior. Readable code is not only easier to maintain, it is usually safer. Poorly styled code may appear to be correct, but then a minor modification 3 lines away causes the order of execution to change, and all of a sudden you have a program producing an invalid result or potentially some unwanted undefined behavior. Understanding sequencing is also a vital skill for writing correct multi-threaded programs. Before you can understand how threads interact with each other, you need to know how the operations are sequenced within a single thread. The multi-threaded memory model, which was added in C++ 11, is just an extension of the topic of sequencing.
Before we can talk about sequencing, we need to first define the term side effect. A side effect is some action an expression takes to modify state. The most common side effect we encounter as programmers is changing the value of an existing variable. Returning a value is not considered to be a side effect. By definition, the expression 8 plus 5 does not produce a side effect, since all it does is compute the value 13. The code on line 1 initializes a variable at the same time it is declared. Since var a is initially constructed with the value 13, this statement does not modify any existing data, so it is not considered to have any side effects. In the declaration of var b, the variable is not initialized. The assignment on the following line changes the state of an existing variable, namely var b, and therefore this assignment expression does have a side effect. There are 4 specific types of side effects defined in the C++ standard. Anytime a volatile object is accessed or read, it is considered a single side effect. The most common side effect developers should be aware of is when an object is modified. The third case is when calling a library I/O function. The standard does not explicitly define which functions fall in this category, but you can assume it refers to functions like printf and fwrite. We have 2 sample lines of code here. Take a moment to examine them and see how many side effects you think each one contains. The expression on line 1 assigns a new value to var a. That is a write access to an object, which means this expression has a single side effect. The expression on line 2 assigns to var b, which is one side effect. It also decrements var a, which is a second side effect.
The C++ language has contained the idea of a sequence point since the very beginning. A sequence point is nothing more than a defined location in your code where all the side effects from the previous expressions are complete and subsequent expressions have not yet started to be evaluated. As we mentioned before, the compiler is allowed to reorder the execution of expressions as long as the meaning of the code is not altered. A more precise way to word this is to say the compiler is allowed to freely reorder your code, but only between sequence points.
The Standards Committee realized the idea of sequence points was too restrictive. Starting with C++11, sequence points were generalized to the more flexible term of sequencing. The idea is that given any two expressions, we should be able to ask, what is the sequencing relationship between expression A and expression B? There are three possible answers, and the standard defines a set of rules for determining the sequencing relationship between any pair of expressions. If expression A is sequenced before expression B, it logically follows that expression B is sequenced after expression A. This is the most strict kind of sequencing relationship. Two expressions may also be indeterminately sequenced, in which case one or the other will come first, but it is not defined which. Finally, the most lenient relationship is for two expressions to be unsequenced with respect to each other. This means the compiler may overlap or interleave the instructions that evaluate these two expressions. We mentioned that understanding sequencing would be useful in determining if an expression produced undefined behavior. One of the rules in the standard states that if two side effects, or one side effect and a read, occur on the same object and they are unsequenced, the result is undefined behavior. Take a moment to examine these two examples and find all the side effects. Then determine if either example would result in undefined behavior. The answer depends on which version of the standard your compiler adheres to. In C++03, both of these expressions have undefined behavior. Both var A and var B are modified twice between sequence points, which by the definition in C++03 is undefined behavior. In C++11, with the migration to the sequenced before and sequenced after terminology, a rule was added stating the side effect of a pre-increment operation is sequenced before the value of the operation is computed. This makes the example using var A well defined. Since no rule was added for a post-increment operation in C++11, the example with var B remained as undefined behavior. In C++17, a rule was added stating that all side effects on the right side of an assignment operator are sequenced before any computation of the left side. This means the example using var B is now well-defined behavior, but only as of C++17.
Another area of the standard which was enhanced is the way pass parameters are evaluated. Prior to C++17, the order in which function parameters were evaluated was unspecified. In the call to the function plan dinner, these function parameters have a side effect, which is the assignment to var1. Since the order of evaluation of do thing 1 and do thing 2 is unspecified, and in fact, the read of var1 could be interleaved with the assignment to var1, this code produces undefined behavior. Starting with C++17, the rules changed. Now the individual parameters are indeterminately sequenced with respect to each other. This means the compiler cannot interleave the operations. Instead, it must evaluate the arguments in some order. Namely, either do thing 1 will be called and then do thing 2, or the reverse. Even though the order is arbitrary and may still be a bug, this code in C++17 will not result in undefined behavior, which will make it easier to track down and resolve any bugs.
Here is another example which has multiple side effects. Given the sample shown below, how will the compiler interpret the meaning of this expression? What value will be computed, and which element of the array will it be placed in? Or does this code simply result in undefined behavior? In any version prior to C++17, this code has undefined behavior. In C++11, there are no sequencing rules to determine if the post increment on the left-hand side is done before or after the post increment on the right-hand side. There is also no rule saying if either post increment must be done before the assignment operator. There is a rule in C++11 saying the left and right sides of the assignment must be computed before the assignment occurs. But the rule says nothing about side effects, namely the two post-increment operations. These post-increments can happen anywhere. In C++17, the rules changed for sequencing. Several new rules were added, which made this code have well-defined behavior. One of the new rules states the right-hand side of an assignment is sequenced before the left-hand side, which is sequenced before the assignment operation. The other new rule, which relates to this example, states the side effect inside the square brackets must occur after the array indexing operation. This example points out how fragile and messy code can be when you have multiple side effects in a complex expression. Hopefully we have illustrated why implementations should have as few side effects as possible. When you do need code with multiple side effects, try to keep your expressions as simple as possible to avoid readability problems, undefined behavior, and subtle bugs. For more information about the CopperSpice project, please visit our website at www.copperspice.com.
Thanks for watching. We hope you found the content of value. If you have any questions or feedback, feel free to leave a comment on this video or send us an email.
Please make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and come back in a few weeks for our next video.